Hey, church. About 2 weeks ago, Pastor Colby and I were able to announce that Colonial Baptist will be joining with Pillar Church of Dumfries to form one church, and that later we'll start another new church in Stafford called Pillar Church of Stafford. And we're really excited about that whole process. But as we were going through the process, we learned quite a bit about Colonial Baptist and the history of the church and all that the Lord has done there. And it's been exciting to learn about the history of the church, and just to be reminded as a church ourselves that God does amazing things to establish churches and communities for a time, and those churches have life cycles and they wrap up, and then God does new things, and He's always doing a new thing. And just like He does with humans, we're born and we die, we have life cycles, and the same thing happens with churches. And so what I wanted to do in this week's episode of I'm Glad You Asked, I wanted to interview the Creed family, the family that started Colonial Baptist, and give you a little sense of all that the Lord has done there over the years. So this is my interview with Mickey and Barbara Creed.
Okay, I'm Mickey Creed. This is my wife, Barbara. We have been married since 1968.
Yeah, 1968.
So 52 years in December.
And how old were you guys when you got married?
I was 25, she was 22.
Okay.
She had just graduated from Grace College in Winona Lake, Indiana. I was working for Youth for Christ organization, and I was out there for a training seminar. So
I think one of our elders' fathers is a longtime professor there, so we'll have a connection there. I'm pretty sure. So we'll have to talk about that another time.
Maybe not quite that long.
Yeah.
I was already in ministry. I was working for Youth for Christ when we met. By the time we got married, I had become a youth pastor in a Baptist church in Elkton, Maryland. And we spent a couple more years there. Then I went off and finished college and seminary. And so over the years, I worked in a couple of different churches as in youth ministry. Got into Christian education, administrated 3 Christian schools, and teaching. And while I was in seminary, Barb got her master's in English, so she was always engaged in teaching. Okay. And any time we were serving, I was working with a church in Clinton, Maryland as an assistant pastor, and was helping him with a Christian school, helping in some other areas. He wanted to start a Bible Institute, and I was helping him there. And it was in a missions conference in January 1980 that thought someday I'd be interested in pastoring, but was in no hurry.
Yeah.
Sort of one of those situations where when I was in youth ministry, I enjoyed it and thought, boy, I want to do this the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Then the Lord led me into Christian school administration. Boy, I enjoy this. I'd like to do this the rest of my life. But in missions conference, a missionary from Japan just shared a message, and the Lord spoke to me then, and time to pastor. So we had been in Christian service for a number of years, so didn't even consider starting the church. We thought, well, we've been in ministry for years, there's established work. And but I was through some unusual circumstances. I was at a pastor's fellowship, and there was a young couple there. The gentleman was there, and Chuck, and he had moved to Stafford from that church in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And then the pastor introduced him, said he was hoping to start a church, Baptist church. I introduced myself to him, told him I was not interested in starting a church, but just want to let him know I was looking for a church. Don't know why I even introduced myself to him, but he pulled a dirty trick on us. He invited us to come over for dinner.
Yeah.
We were not familiar with Stafford at all, and in the middle of dinner, he looked at me and said, would you pray about coming to Stafford and starting a church?
It's hard to say no to that.
Sure, sure, we'll pray about it. And so the Lord went to work, and it was this time, 40 years ago, this time of the year, in the spring.
And did you guys have kids by that time?
We had
Two.
We had 2.
Anna was 2.
Anna was 2.5, and we had a son that was 6 months.
Okay.
And
we had another child after we came here.
and then Tim was born after we moved over here. And so we decided, this couple was meeting with an elderly lady, and they had a Bible study in their home. and we started traveling over, meeting at Bible study, and so we traveled over throughout probably April, May. We had our very first service June 1st, 1980. And interesting, Stafford County at that time would not allow, they had an ordinance against using public schools for churches.
Oh, wow.
And so this county was so, this part of the county was so rural and so young.
Yeah.
There was actually no places to meet, but Stafford Baptist had just completed their building.
Yeah.
And they had been meeting in an old, yellow, dilapidated building.
I know the building.
And,
It's down past courthouse.
yeah, right
Yeah,
across
it's
from
right
the
in that
courthouse,
area.
right behind Acquia Realty.
Yeah.
And so, June 1st, 1980, we had our first service in that
So
building.
you went in there behind them?
We
as
went
soon
in
as they
behind
moved
them
into the
as
new
soon as they moved
facility.
up.
That's incredible.
And
That's
they had the downstairs sort of set up for an auditorium and had some rooms upstairs, and
yeah.
and so we
Well, Stafford Baptist hadn't been going that long at the time.
No.
They started in '79, I think.
Yeah.
So wow, that's
yeah.
great. Yeah.
So we started, had our first service June 1st, 1980, and we were officially, we had our organizational service the first Sunday of October 1980. We considered that's usually what we celebrate for anniversaries was the, and so we had about 21 people sign the charter that day.
Wow.
And so we started meeting that building. We met in there for a couple of years. Then we rented out the basement from Acquia Realty. We rented one of those little buildings between them and the court,
Yeah.
across the street from the courthouse. And so we were spread out in that area for Sunday school space. And then in 1983, there was an elderly German couple that owned a car repair shop up here, right up around the corner where that auto place is now, and
Yeah.
he had a mechanic, and they were in the process of getting a divorce, and so they were splitting up the land, and so she approached. At some way I met her, and we got interested, and she had 4.7 acres up over the hill
Okay.
where the soccer field is and the house, and so I think, as I can recall, she wanted about $28,000 for it, and I think I told her that we had $10,000 available. Would she take that and the rest for a tax write-off? And she accepted it.
No. Wow.
So we bought that
I've tried that many times and never gotten a taker.
We bought that 4.7 acres and planned on building there, but a year later, this front footage became available. There was an old house out here where the modular is. There was a barn over here, and the county they had foreclosed. The bank had foreclosed on the owner of this property, and it was about 3.5, and acres. We had members that didn't really want to go that route. They were anxious to build.
Yeah.
And they knew it would delay our building,
Yeah.
but we felt the front footage.
Yeah.
We had an older gentleman that was a deacon in our church at that time, and he was real wise, and he said, boy, he said, it's a lot easier than, telling somebody, go down here to Courthouse Road, turn left, go about 2 miles, take a right. He said, it's a lot easier to say, we're about a half a mile below Acquia Harbor and on Route 1. And so we bought that. They wanted about 110,000. And so we ended up with a little over 8 acres
Wow.
for about 130-some thousand.
The parcels adjoin, they're connect?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah, the parcels connect. The bank realized that we owned the land next to it. They approached us, and so that's how we got this property. That was we got the second parcel in 1983. 1984 or 85, no, 83 and 84, we got the second parcel in 84. In 85, the Lutheran Church down on Courthouse Road
Yes.
were meeting
Yes.
they were meeting in the old courthouse. And they had completed their building,
Right.
moving out of the courthouse. We asked the county if we could use that. Boy, they wanted to get away from a church meeting in there. But we told them we'd purchased a piece of property, be building soon. So we shifted over and we started meeting in that old courtroom. We met there about 2 or 3 years, and we completed this building in 1987. Then we built this, and most of our people did most of the work on this building.
Wow.
And we built this for about $360,000.
That's unbelievable.
So for less than $500,000, we had the little over 8 acres of property, the building, and so that's how we got started. And we moved here in moved into this building in 1987, and we started Christian school about the same time. And
What did moving into a building mean to the congregation? Was it a big step?
Oh, it was a big step, because meeting in the courthouse, although that was a number of stories we could tell in that, but it was an experience. It was a fun experience, really.
Yeah.
But we would haul in there every Sunday morning with songbooks. They actually helped us. That was back when you would have 1 week revival meetings, and we actually had a revival meeting, Vacation Bible School, in the courthouse, and it was just amazing that they we had quite experience.
But it wasn't real good for Sunday school.
Yeah.
We did use the old house though, didn't we?
Yeah, we started using the old house for.
And we had the auditorium down there.
And they actually
It was
let us.
complicated.
Yeah. They let us start using the downstairs. The upstairs wasn't completed. They let us start meeting downstairs in this building
Before it's finished.
before it was finished. I actually sneaked up here and did a baptismal service. And we had nothing on the floor, nothing up here. We had the baptismal in. And so we moved here in 1987, and then, the work just really grew after that.
Yeah.
And God just really blessed, and we just had a great time. That was back in the day where churches would have bus ministries.
Yeah.
We had a bus ministry. We had men. I still know people today that can receive the Lord through that bus ministry.
I was first introduced to church through a bus ministry.
Really?
God really used it, and we had men that would. We had a number of young high school and college age young men that were just excited, and they worked that ministry.
Wow.
And there are people, I know adults today, and a lady who works in the courthouse now as a stenographer. She was saved and received the Lord as a result. She and her two, her brother and her sister. And every now and then I run into someone that will remind me.
Yeah.
And a family, a Lara family, Joe was a DC policeman, and he really worked actively in that. And after he retired from the police department, he went into ministry, started a church in New Mexico, went off to, then went to Alaska and served as a missionary. And so the Lord really blessed over the years, and just a number of people saved. We were very missions minded. We've always supported a number of missionaries, and the Christian school grew. We went up through 12th grade at one time, but we got ahead of ourselves.
All right here.
We
on
did,
program.
we didn't really have the
Very many
facility, and
students in upper grade.
so we backed up to 8th grade. And
I graduated from a Christian school that I had 6 in my graduating class, and my wife graduated from that same school. She had 2 in her graduating class, and I like to brag that I was in the top 5 in my class.
There you go.
yeah, that's a good way. The Lord really used the school over the years, and we've and there wasn't hardly a year that went by that we didn't get a family or our families through the school.
Yeah.
And so it was
It was an
great
effective
in that
ministry
sense.
tool at the
It was a
time.
ministry tool, and number of men called out to preach, mission filled. Number of our ladies went off to Christian college, married preachers, and so the Lord is used, and that's an exciting part, and that's what you're engaged in, church planting, and we always felt that was an important part of the ministry.
Yeah. I spend almost all my time day to day with young hopeful church planners, the version of yourselves that you described, you know,
Yeah.
from years ago when you had young kids, and
Yeah.
it's you know, rare to be able to see a situation like this where somebody has invested years in ministry and lives to tell about it, you know.
Yeah.
One of the things I have respected about you guys from a distance is that Anna has been so engaged in the work with you, and that you passed the ministry along to your son-in-law.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, as a person who's trying to be a pastor and raise kids and watching other pastors do that, it's challenging. So anything you would say about the opportunity you've had to do ministry with Anna and Mike?
Yeah. And when we moved here in 1980, Anna was 2.5. We had a son, Joe, who was 6 months, and then Tim was born 2 years later. So we have 3 children, and our 2 boys are attorneys, and then Anna. When Anna was in about the 7th grade, she always loved music. She was taking piano lessons, and we had a Coast Guard officer who worked with our children's church, and he asked if Anna could start playing piano for him for children's church. And from that point on, music just became her passion.
Yeah.
And so she was very active in the music.
She was active in the youth group.
She was,
and
yeah,
everything,
active.
too.
Yeah, they were all active in
And
the
faithful.
church and in the youth group, and that was good. And one thing you talk about having young children. One thing I always appreciated is our church let our kids be kids.
Yeah.
They didn't put them in a glass house, and so our kids didn't
When
feel.
you say our kids, you mean your children?
Yeah, our
Our
children,
children.
and I can remember saying to our kids though that I can't give you chapter and verse,
Mhm.
but because I'm the pastor of the church, I'm going to have to ask you
Mhm.
probably some of those closed-hand and open-handed things that that Colby was discussing the other night, But Anna, when Anna was very active in the music as a teenager, she started playing for the choir and the congregation music very early on. She was just single-minded in that, and had a passion, and of course we heard her practicing the piano an hour, 2 hours a day for the time she was a teenager, and she went away for college for 1 year. It was a little too far in Florida. She came home, and that was really the only year she was away. And she enrolled in Washington Bible College. She lived over there in the dorm, but she would come home on weekends. And it was shortly after that she became our choir director. I had a music director who just resigned 1 week and was gone, and so I said, Anna, and she was probably about 21, 22 at the
Maybe
time.
Maybe not even. Maybe
yeah.
20.
I said, why don't you take the choir until till we decide what to do.
Mhm.
And Anna always was a very organized person.
Yeah.
And the choir just really fell in love with her. She was very organized. She came in prepared, and really one of the strong points of our ministry has always been our music.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I would say the majority of it, all of it, was due to Anna and just her passion and just her organization. And she was always the type of person that she had some piano teachers that were really encouraging teachers. And she was an encouraging teacher and always encouraged people to get involved in music.
Mhm.
I always said to people, they talked about joining the choir. I said, if you join the choir, you'll learn, you'll grow.
Yeah.
And that was true. And so she and Mike met at Washington Bible College, and then after they got married,
They came even before they were married.
yeah, he
came
would
on
come over on
weekends.
weekends with her. And our church was a little different than the church he grew up and was saved in.
Yeah.
But Mike, from the very beginning, we just had a real good relationship, and he was very active.
Mhm.
and so,
He's just a worker.
yeah.
Yeah, he's a hard worker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and his fingerprints are probably all over
Yeah.
building. Yeah, anybody knows Mike knows his ability to build, and he's
Yeah.
done a lot of things in
But
his church. and-
ministry too, and he's musical too,
Is it?
actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, he's a good
Oh.
musician.
Yeah,
He
Mike's,
can sing and
yeah.
he can play string instruments.
Well, Mike, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
explore that a little bit.
yeah,
But then, I mean, as far as they worked in the youth ministry, and he did a lot of things besides
Yeah.
building too.
yeah, he was active in the youth ministry, and there are members in the church today that were in Mike's youth ministry,
Yeah.
and that have just transferred that respect to him.
Yeah.
It was just sort of natural, and Mike was in construction work, but he felt years ago God called him to ministry, but he was sort of in and out, and then finally, several years ago, I went through an experience where I broke the tibia in my left foot and had a lot of infection, and boy, it really sent me back, and it was along about that time that Mike really solidified that God wanted him in a full-time ministry, and so after that experience, we brought him on to staff, and went through this with our church officers, just told them I'd like to bring Mike on with the understanding that he would be my replacement. And so church voted unanimously on that, and so there was that understanding. So when I was ready to step aside, and we just got to the place to where, you know, I had pastored for 38 years here, and we thought it was time, and they needed an infusion of a more youthful situation, and during that time, the church had really struggled. I just didn't have us prepared, and I tried to hang on and do more preaching than I should have during that illness. I went through about 6 surgeries in 2 years, and it was really a time. And by the time, and then coming out of that, you know, we just spent a couple of years, and Mike got real active, and then we just turned it over to him, and of course that's been exciting for us because Mike's always had a heart, and Mike's always been a worker, and he's always been respectful, and we just had a real good relationship, and so that's always continued, and so we stepped aside, and I think it's been about 2 years. This July 15th, 2018, I stepped aside, so this July will be 2 years. And
Yeah, it's, you mentioned the church voted unanimously on the decision to bring Mike as the successor, and then they made this decision unanimously. In my experience, that only happens in churches when the congregation has respect for the leadership and trust their judgment and the things they're trying to lead them to do. And so, you know, just thinking about the likelihood of success in a situation like that, where a father-in-law would pass the mantle along to his son-in-law, and then be able to be supportive and part of the congregation through major changes.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, your legacy and maturity is just very inspirational in all of that. And that's something that wouldn't happen in most situations. So thank you for your.
Mike and Anna were very, very upfront when we started working toward the transition.
Yeah.
And they were very respectful and upfront. You know, we want to go in some different directions.
Yeah.
Are you going to be okay with this?
Yeah.
And I felt like they brought a youthfulness to it, and we felt like that, you know, generationally, they were bringing something to the ministry that it needed that infusion, and so it was a good. And then the church voted Mike in. I think it was about 95%. Other pastors said, "Tell Mike that'll be the last time you'll get that high."
Actually, it wasn't though, because we had 100%.
Yeah, we had 100%. But
And that's pretty exciting.
That is exciting. I never would have guessed that would have happened.
no, and it has been exciting for us to see how God has worked with Mike and Anna. And Anna's always been an important part here. Mike was always in the choir, always involved in the music, and of course his boys are involved in music today. So you can see that. So it was a real blessing from that standpoint. And this has been it's this newest transition has been certainly different for us. But we're at the place to where we feel like, you know, this is a different generation, different, you know, and we're not going to get in the way of God, God working and God moving forward.
Well, I not only hope that, I mean, that's true, but I also am looking forward to engaging with you guys in ministry. And working
Well,
with you
we are
in
too,
ministry.
Sure,
yeah.
Yeah, we're excited about the whole situation. The deeper we get into it, the more substance and goodness we see in Mike and Anna and you guys and the congregation. And so we have a ton of respect for you and are grateful for your willingness to walk down this road and feeling like it's the Lord's prompting, and excited about the days ahead, how we can plant churches and reach people with the gospel.
Yeah, we're excited about what God's doing and what He's going to do.
Yeah, me too.
And we're at the place to where, you know, it's never been our attitude that, you know, let's just back up and it's time to rest, but we've always felt like, no, we want to stay as busy as we can in ministry. And I think, you know, that ought to be the attitude of every Christian. You know, until God takes me home, I want to be engaged in some part of ministry.
That's right. Yeah.
And so,
Wow.
that's where we've always been.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. It'll be encouraging to our congregation.
Well, I hope so.
We're looking forward to meeting them too.
Yes. We whenever that day is, that we all get to be in the same room together again.
That'll happen.
Yeah, it will happen. Yes, this too shall pass. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Mickey and Barbara as much as I enjoyed spending time with them, and I hope that this will help you to understand some of what the members of Colonial Baptist love so much about the church that they're leaving now. And as they come to us and they begin to integrate into our congregation, I pray that God would use us to receive them in a way that would make them feel like family. So, as you pray for the people of Colonial Baptist and the transition they're making, let me encourage you to pray that God would give them unusual connectivity and joy in the midst of this transition.